Hey guys, today we're going to be going through about a third of our Reconstruction notes. It is a long note set, so we're going to break it up over multiple days. The word Reconstruction itself means that we're putting things back together. So in terms of the Civil War, after the Civil War, we have to put the North and the South back together into one big country after the South has surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia in 1865. So when it comes to the Civil War, in order to understand how we need to put the country back together, we need to understand what happened. Let's take a look at the death toll. Now remember, in this war, it was North versus South. So everyone that died was American. Unlike other wars where we're fighting other foreign nations, our death toll is going to be a lot bigger. So for example, the death toll in the Revolutionary War was 25,000. In the American Civil War, it was 625,000. This accounts for about 2% of the entire population at this time period, and a lot of it is young men. So an entire generation of young men just wiped out. 1/5 of the South's white population was killed in the war. And this number, this huge number, doesn't even include those who weren't fighting in the war, but they died because they were in a town that got burnt to the ground, or they starved in the South. So it doesn't include civilian deaths. It's just war deaths, soldier deaths. Here's an example of the devastation, especially wrought on the South, and especially the city of Atlanta, Georgia, and Savannah, Georgia, were completely burnt to the ground after the war. And many small towns, especially in the South, end up looking like this. And how are you supposed to rebuild a country if half of our nation looks like this? So Reconstruction was necessary because the South needed help putting itself back together in order to rejoin the Union. So the Southern landscape completely ruined. Major cities, all their railroads, farms that the Northern Army had encountered as they took through the South at the very end of the war, like Sherman's March to the Sea battle kind of stuff and the Siege of Atlanta. They just set fire to them, took what they could, cattle, gold, saddles, and farm goods that were of worth, and then laid waste to the rest. Railroads and plantations were destroyed. If it wasn't burnt to the ground, the slaves who had been freed, liberated by the Union Army, had run away and they weren't slaves anymore. They were freedmen and weren't tending to the fields. So many thousands of acres of fields were just grown up with weeds, and the crop couldn't be harvested anymore. Livestock killed, machinery destroyed, property wealth gone. And so we go from this period before the Civil War, where wealth held in the South was 30% of the money in America was kind of held in the South. It drops down to 12 because all of that capital, those things that could be used to produce money, are destroyed. On top of that, 4 million former slaves, we call them freedmen now, 4 million of them have an uncertain future. Most of them can't read or write and don't have job opportunities in the still controlled by the white South. So when it comes to Reconstruction, how are we supposed to put together a country that just fought each other and slaughtered over 500,000 of its own citizens? How do we reunite those two pieces? How do we reconstruct? We first have to think, they had to think, what place would African Americans have in political and social life in the South? As freedmen, no longer slaves, how do we fit them into the grain of our country? What about former Confederate states and soldiers and leaders? Are they just going to be states? Do they have to prove their loyalty before they join? And what about those that fought? Should they be punished, or should they be forgiven and brought back into the country? And different people during Reconstruction have different ideas about this. So the act of Reconstruction itself happens multiple times because Lincoln has a plan, then he dies. Johnson becomes president, then he's impeached. Congress kind of takes over, and then things peter out. So there's lots of different plans and Reconstruction ideas we're going to be looking at. So Lincoln's plan, he starts putting it together before the war even ends. In December 1863, the war ends in April 1865. he issues his first plan called the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. We're going to be reading this actual plan here, but here's the gist of it. It offers forgiveness to all Southerners except Confederate military leaders who pledge loyalty for the Union and support emancipation. So they must free slaves. So it's a lot of forgiveness. It's called amnesty, and the word amnesty means forgiveness. And the reason behind this is Lincoln's idea was, let's put the war behind us. So sometimes Lincoln's plan is called the 10% plan because of this. It proposed that if 10% of a state's, southern state's voters, so if 10% of white men take the oath, say they're loyal to the Union, then the whole state can join. Even the 90% who said that they weren't loyal, they can still rejoin the Union and create a state and come back to the United States of America as Georgia or as South Carolina or as Arkansas, okay? But their new government had to ban slavery. And this actually happened 3 times before Lincoln was assassinated within that course of the end of the war. Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee agreed to the 10%. 10% of their white voter population said an oath, raised their hand, said, I promise to be loyal to the Union, slavery is bad, and those states were admitted as states to the Union, and slavery is no more. Lincoln dies, however, and his 10% plan dies with him. These states are in the Union, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee, but there still needs to be a plan for states who hadn't been admitted under the 10% plan. So before Lincoln dies, Congress is not a big fan of this. Congress responds and says, do you even have that power? You're just the president. Shouldn't elected leaders like representatives and senators come together and decide what happens for Reconstruction? And so they decide that readmitting states to the Union is an act of Congress. And they put forth a bill called the Wade-Davis bill. And we're going to read this in class as well, okay? So the reason that they're dissenting here is they thought that these states that left the Union, when they come back, they should be punished a little bit. They should be seen as a territory until they earn their right to become a state. Some said that secession was unlawful and the states had never actually left the Union. There was just like a skirmish. So the Wade-Davis bill is put forth, and it said that a majority means 50%. So sometimes this is called the 50% plan of a state's white male citizens had to pledge loyalty, say that they believed in emancipation, and then elections could be held and the state could be readmitted with emancipation, with freed slaves put in their constitution. Okay, let me write that, and you're going to write it on your paper too. However, Lincoln is not a big fan of this because this is a lot more harsh than his 10% plan. So while Lincoln is alive, he pocket vetoes this, which means he just chooses not to sign it, and after 14 days, it is considered a veto. And the reason being is his idea is forgiveness. Let's end it and let's start rebuilding. Whereas this plan, the hope was to punish them a little bit more, make it stricter and harder to come back into the Union. Okay, so that's where we're gonna stop there, and we'll continue with freedmen's rights in the next video.